The thing about expensive restaurants is that they sell the illusion of control. Every detail curated, every variable managed, every moment choreographed to suggest that money can purchase immunity from chaos. David Chen had built his fortune on understanding illusions, how they functioned, where they failed, how to profit from the gap between perception and reality. But he had never questioned the fundamental lie of places like Aurelius, that elegance could insulate you from consequence. Table 7 occupied the corner he preferred. Back to the wall, clear sightlines to both entrances, proximity to the kitchen without being overwhelmed by its noise. His security waited outside in a black sedan, invisible but present. Inside, he was meant to be untouchable. At 38, David had perfected the art of dining alone. Other people were variables he couldn't control, their agendas, their needs, their unpredictable humanity. Solitude was strategic. He could think clearly, make calls between courses, exist in the productive silence that had made him wealthy beyond most people's comprehension. The restaurant hummed with the particular frequency of old money and new prestige. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across white linen. Conversations murmured at civilized volumes. Somewhere, a piano played something classical and inoffensive, the soundtrack of wealth performing its practiced superiority. Maya Torres moved through this landscape like water, present, essential, largely invisible. She had served David's section 4 times in the past 2 months. He had never asked her name, never met her eyes for longer than courtesy required, never registered her as anything beyond the mechanism that delivered food and removed plates. She understood this. Service workers learned early that invisibility was currency. Be present enough to anticipate needs, absent enough to preserve the customer's illusion of independence. She had been doing this dance for 8 months at Aurelius, 3 years before that at other establishments where tips paid for textbooks and her mother's mounting medical bills. But Maya had something most servers lacked: the training of someone halfway through nursing school and the instincts of someone who had grown up watching for danger in places where it wore expensive suits and polite smiles. Tonight, as she carried the main course from the kitchen, every instinct she possessed screamed that something was wrong. The plate was perfect. Butter-poached halibut arranged with architectural precision, saffron reduction pooled in elegant asymmetry, microgreens positioned like small declarations of spring. Nothing about it looked dangerous, but it had come from the wrong station, passed through the wrong hands, been finished with a sauce that Marcus, the head chef, had prepared personally, despite this dish never being on his usual rotation. Maya's pulse quickened as she approached table 7. David didn't look up from his phone, absorbed in whatever algorithm or acquisition currently demanded his attention. She placed the plate before him with hands that had learned to stay steady through exhaustion, stress, and now, rising alarm. He nodded without meeting her eyes, a gesture of acknowledgement that somehow managed to confirm her non-existence. His fork descended toward the halibut, and Maya made a choice that would save his life and nearly cost her own. Maya had 3 seconds to decide, 3 seconds between placing the plate and David's first bite. 3 seconds in which her nursing training, her survival instincts, and something deeper collided into action. She had seen poison before, not like this, not hidden in saffron reduction on porcelain worth more than her monthly rent, but in emergency rooms during her clinical rotations. The pale lips, the sudden numbness, the way a body shut down when chemistry turned hostile. She had memorized symptoms the way other people memorized songs, understanding that knowledge like this could mean the difference between life and someone's last breath. The plate before David Chen contained something wrong. She couldn't prove it, couldn't test it, couldn't articulate the specific markers that had triggered her alarm. but 3 weeks of watching Marcus receive visitors who didn't look like suppliers, of catching fragments of Spanish conversation about the tech billionaire and clean and untraceable, had taught her to trust her instincts over her uncertainty. David's fork hovered over the halibut, his attention still divided between the meal and whatever urgent message glowed on his phone screen. He ate like someone for whom food was fuel rather than pleasure. Efficient, distracted, disconnected from the ritual happening before him. Maya's mind raced through options. She could knock the plate away, cause a scene, warn him directly. But if she was wrong, she'd lose her job, her income, her ability to pay for the treatments keeping her mother alive. And if she was right but lacked proof, whoever wanted David dead would simply try again with better planning. The fork descended another inch. "I'm so sorry, sir," Maya said, her voice carrying the practiced apology she'd perfected over thousands of shifts. "There's been a mistake with your order." David looked up, irritation flickering across his features. His fork paused mid-descent. "What kind of mistake?" "The kitchen prepared this with butter," she improvised, her pulse hammering beneath her professional composure. "But your reservation profile notes a dairy sensitivity." His frown deepened. "I don't have a dairy sensitivity." "My apologies." Maya reached for the plate with the fluid confidence of someone who had carried hundreds of dishes without accident. "Perhaps I misread the notes. Let me take this back and have them prepare a replacement." David's attention had already shifted back to his phone, dismissing the minor inconvenience with the distraction of someone who assumed the world would correct itself around his needs. He waved one hand in vague permission, already composing a response to whatever message demanded his focus. Maya lifted the plate. Her hands remained steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. This was the moment, the space between decision and consequence. In her other hand, she held the empty plate she'd carried from the service station, insurance against questions, part of the choreography of efficient table service. 2 plates, one poisoned, one empty, both white porcelain, both identical in weight and dimension. The switch happened in the space of a breath. Not dramatic, not obvious. Just a fluid rotation of her wrists, muscle memory from years of balancing multiple dishes transforming into something more consequential. The poisoned plate moved to her right hand, elevated slightly, held the way she might display something to a guest. The empty plate descended to table height, positioned exactly where the other had been. David never looked up. His world remained contained within the glowing rectangle of his phone, the conversation happening there more real to him than the woman standing 3 feet away, who had just altered the trajectory of his life. "The replacement will be out shortly," Maya said, her voice steady despite her racing thoughts. "Please accept my apologies for the confusion." He nodded without acknowledgement. "Already forgotten." Maya turned toward the kitchen, moving with the measured pace of someone completing a routine task. Not rushing, not hesitating. Just a server returning a plate with the same competence she displayed 50 times per shift. But this time, she held death in her hands, and she understood, with crystalline clarity, that she had just made a choice that had no safe resolution. If she was wrong, she'd embarrassed herself over nothing. If she was right, whoever had poisoned this plate would know their plan had failed, and they would wonder why. She made it 5 meters before she felt the first symptom, a tingling in her fingertips, subtle enough to dismiss as nerves or poor circulation. She adjusted her grip on the plate, her thumb inadvertently touching the edge where sauce had pooled. 10 meters. The tingling spread to her palm, then her wrist. Not painful, but wrong. A numbness that moved with purposeful speed like ink dispersing through water. 15 meters. Her vision began to narrow, peripheral details blurring as if someone had adjusted the aperture on a camera. The dining room remained visible, but distant. Sounds muted. Colors bleeding into amber and shadow. She understood what was happening. The poison wasn't just in the food. It had been applied to the plate's surface, absorbed through skin contact. Sophisticated. Professional. Designed to ensure that even caution wouldn't save the target. 20 meters. Her legs began to forget their function. Not collapsing yet, but losing the automated coordination that allowed walking without conscious thought. Each step required deliberate instruction from a brain that was starting to struggle with signal transmission. Maya tried to set the plate down on a nearby service station. Her hands wouldn't cooperate. The porcelain tilted, slipped, fell. The sound of shattering crystal cut through the restaurant's civilized murmur like a gunshot. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. The piano hesitated mid-phrase. Maya felt her knees buckle. The floor rushed upward with the inevitability of gravity asserting its claim. She tried to catch herself, but her arms wouldn't respond to commands that had worked flawlessly seconds earlier. She collapsed onto white tile, her body surrendering with the elegant finality of architecture accepting demolition. Her cheek pressed against cold stone. Chandelier light fractured across her vision in kaleidoscope patterns. Somewhere above her, she heard voices rising in alarm, footsteps approaching, someone shouting for a doctor. The mechanical sounds of emergency protocols engaging in a space where emergencies weren't supposed to exist. And through the narrowing tunnel of her consciousness, she heard one voice closer than the others. Male, sharp with confusion and rising panic. What happened? Someone call an ambulance. David Chen's voice, finally noticing her, finally seeing her. 5 minutes too late to matter and exactly on time to understand what she had done. Maya's last coherent thought before darkness claimed her was simple, almost peaceful. At least he's alive. Then the world disappeared and she surrendered to the poison she had chosen to bear. The human body is a collection of chemical reactions wrapped in skin. When those reactions fail, when the delicate balance tips toward catastrophe, the body announces its surrender through symptoms that arrive with ruthless precision. Maya had studied this process in textbooks, had witnessed it in emergency rooms where fluorescent lights turned crisis into clinical detail. But she had never experienced it from the inside. The numbness that began in her fingertips moved like fire in reverse. Not burning, but erasing. Sensation disappearing as the poison disrupted nerve transmission, shutting down the electrical grid that allowed her body to communicate with itself. Her hands lost their ability to grip. The plate she carried, beautiful, deadly evidence, tilted from fingers that no longer remembered how to hold objects. It fell in what felt like slow motion, but lasted perhaps half a second. White porcelain meeting tile with the sharp crack of broken elegance. The sound cut through Aurelius's atmosphere of controlled refinement like a declaration that something fundamental had broken. Maya's legs failed next. Not gradually, but with sudden completeness. The muscles simply stopped receiving instructions. One moment she was standing, the next she was falling with nothing between her and the floor except the certainty of impact. She hit the tile hard. Her shoulder took most of the force, then her hip, then her cheek pressed against cold stone that smelled faintly of industrial cleaner and expensive shoes. The world tilted sideways, chandelier light fracturing across her vision into fragments that didn't quite assemble into coherence. Sound arrived distorted, as if filtered through water. Gasps from nearby tables, the scrape of chairs pushing back. Footsteps approaching from multiple directions, their urgency translated into rhythm rather than meaning. Oh my God! Someone call 911? What's happening? Is she breathing? Voices layered over voices, panic spreading through the dining room like spilled wine soaking into linen. Maya tried to answer, to reassure, to explain. But her vocal cords had joined the mutiny. Her mouth opened but produced no sound beyond a small, involuntary gasp. Her vision continued its betrayal. Peripheral details disappeared first, darkness closing in from the edges like a vignette tightening around a photograph. What remained in the center grew dim, colors fading toward sepia. She could see polished shoes gathering around her. Expensive leather, impeccable maintenance, the footwear of people for whom this kind of crisis was something that happened to others. Then, different shoes appeared. Men's dress shoes, moving with purpose rather than uncertainty. They stopped inches from her face, and Maya heard a voice she recognized, even through the filter of failing consciousness. Move back. Give her space. David Chen's voice, sharp with command but carrying an edge she'd never heard before. Not anger. Fear. Sir, you shouldn't... Another voice. Male, professional. Security, probably. I said move back. David's shoes shifted and suddenly his face appeared in her narrowing field of vision. He had dropped to his knees beside her, expensive suit forgotten, phone abandoned. For the first time in the months she'd served him, he looked directly at her. Actually saw her. His expression cycled through confusion, alarm, and something that might have been recognition. His hands hovered near her shoulders, wanting to help but uncertain how. Stay with me, he said, the command carrying desperation poorly disguised as authority. Ambulance is coming. Just stay with me. Maya tried to speak, managed only a whisper that barely carried the distance between them. Plate. Switched. Yours. His confusion deepened. What? I don't... Your plate. The words cost her everything remaining in her reserve. I... switched. It was... poisoned? Understanding dawned across his features like sunrise in reverse. Darkness spreading rather than light. His eyes widened, his jaw tightened, his entire posture shifting as the implications assembled themselves into terrible clarity. You switched. He looked toward table 7, where his replacement meal sat untouched. Then back to the shattered porcelain scattered across tile. Then to her face with an intensity that felt like physical weight. You switched my plate with yours. Maya managed the smallest nod. The motion cost her the last of her coordination. Her vision dimmed further, the center point shrinking to a pinhole through which David's face appeared increasingly distant. Why? The question came out raw, stripped of sophistication. Why would you? But Maya couldn't answer. The poison had reached the systems that kept consciousness viable. Her brain, starved of proper chemical communication, began its emergency shutdown. Protective measures against damage that might come from remaining aware while the body failed. No, no, no. David's voice rose, losing its careful control. Stay awake. Look at me. What's your name? Tell me your name. She wanted to answer. Wanted to tell him about her mother, about nursing school, about the 3 weeks she'd spent watching and waiting and hoping she was wrong. Wanted to explain that his life had value beyond algorithms and market shares, that someone needed to remember servers were human beings who made choices and paid costs. But darkness had its own agenda. It pulled her down with the gentle insistence of someone who had been waiting patiently and would not be denied any longer. The last thing she registered was David's hands finally settling on her shoulders, not moving her, just anchoring her, as if physical contact could prevent her from disappearing entirely. His face had transformed into something she'd never seen in all the months of invisible service. Genuine fear, desperate care. The realization that someone he'd never acknowledged had just sacrificed everything to save him. Paramedics are 2 minutes out, someone shouted from somewhere distant. Her pulse is weak. Get the AED. Sir, you need to move. I'm not leaving her. David's voice, final and absolute. Maya's consciousness flickered like a failing bulb. Darkness, then light, then darkness again. Each return shorter than the last. She tried to hold on, to stay present for whatever came next, but the poison had mathematics on its side, chemical reactions proceeding to their inevitable conclusion. Her last coherent thought was strange in its specificity. Not fear, not regret. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had read the situation correctly. The poison had been real. The threat had been legitimate. Her instincts, honed through years of watching and surviving, had been accurate. She had saved him. And if that cost her everything, at least it had meant something. Then the darkness completed its work, and Maya Torres disappeared into unconsciousness that felt terrifyingly close to something more permanent. The dining room continued its crisis around her body, paramedics rushing in, equipment deployed, voices shouting medical terminology that she would have understood under different circumstances. But Maya heard none of it. She had crossed the threshold into a space where sound and light and sensation ceased to exist, where the only thing that remained was the slowly fading warmth of a body fighting a war it might not win. And David Chen, kneeling beside her on tile that cost more per square foot than most people earned in a week, finally understood the weight of being invisible to the wrong person at the wrong time. He had never asked her name, and now she might die before he could learn it. Aromatics moved with the practiced efficiency of people for whom crisis was routine. Two of them entered through Aurelius's front entrance within 90 seconds of the call, equipment cases swinging, radios crackling with coordinates and medical codes. They navigated through the frozen tableau of wealthy diners and scattered staff with the authority of people who had seen worse and would see worse again before their shift ended. David didn't move from Maya's side. His security had positioned themselves around the immediate area, cordoning off space without explicitly ordering anyone back. They were good at their jobs, presence creating compliance without confrontation. "Sir, I need you to step back," the lead paramedic said, a woman in her 40s with the calm voice of someone who had delivered this request 10,000 times. She knelt opposite David, already assessing Maya's condition with rapid, systematic glances. "I'm not leaving her," David said. "I'm not asking you to leave. I'm asking you to give me room to work." He shifted back 6 inches. Not compliance, negotiation. The paramedic accepted it without argument, already moving to more urgent matters. "Female, late 20s, unresponsive," she called to her partner, who was unpacking equipment with mechanical speed. "Pulse weak and thready, respiration shallow, pupils—" She checked with a penlight. Responding, but sluggish. "Overdose?" the partner asked, prepping an IV line. "Unknown. Possible poisoning." The lead paramedic looked up at David. "Do you know what she ingested?" David's jaw tightened. "She didn't ingest anything. Skin contact. The plate—" he gestured toward the shattered porcelain— "was meant for me." The paramedic's expression didn't change, but her movements accelerated. "Nerve agent? Chemical?" "I don't know. Something sophisticated enough that I wouldn't have noticed until it was too late." "Who are you?" "David Chen." Recognition flickered across her features. Tech billionaire poisoned in an upscale restaurant would make headlines for weeks. But she filed that information away for later, focusing instead on the woman whose vitals were deteriorating with concerning speed. "Starting IV, normal saline," her partner announced, securing the line with practiced hands. "BP 90/50 and dropping." "We need to move her now," the lead paramedic said. "Kaiser or Mercy?" "Neither." David's voice carried the absolute certainty of someone whose resources could rewrite standard protocols. "Stanford Medical Center. I'll have a helicopter here in 4 minutes." The paramedic looked up sharply. "Sir, we need to stabilize and transport—" "Stanford has a toxicology team that specializes in rare compounds. They're expecting her." He wasn't asking permission. He was stating what would happen, consequences of his wealth finally deployed for something beyond market manipulation. His phone was already at his ear. "James, I need the helicopter at Aurelius in 3 minutes. Landing zone is the intersection of—" He glanced at his security, who provided the cross streets. California and Montgomery. Clear it with whoever you need to clear it with. And call Dr. Reeves at Stanford. Tell her we're incoming with acute poisoning, unknown compound, suspected nerve agent, or heavy metal derivative. The paramedics exchanged glances. Protocol said they should transport to the nearest emergency room. Reality said that arguing with someone who could redirect helicopters and summon Stanford's chief toxicologist would waste time they didn't have. Backboard, the lead paramedic said to her partner. We stabilize for transport, but we move fast. They worked with synchronized efficiency, securing Maya's neck, sliding the board beneath her with minimal movement, strapping her down with practiced speed. An oxygen mask covered her face, IV line secured, portable monitor attached and displaying vitals that made David's stomach clench with numbers he didn't fully understand but recognized as dangerous. His security had already moved to coordinate with restaurant management. Within seconds, the front entrance was secured, diners being redirected to the rear exit, the area around Maya's collapse point treated as a crime scene because that's exactly what it was. Nobody touches the plate fragments, David commanded. And I want security footage from the past 4 hours. Everything. Kitchen cameras, dining room, loading dock, employee entrance. The restaurant manager, a thin man whose usual composure had evaporated into stuttering panic, nodded rapidly. Of course, Mr. Chen. Whatever you need. I don't understand how this could have... Get me Marcus, the head chef. Now. He left approximately 10 minutes ago. Said he wasn't feeling well. Needed to... David's expression went cold. Find him. And don't let anyone else from the kitchen leave this building. Helicopter rotors became audible outside, growing louder with approaching proximity. The sound seemed impossible. Helicopters didn't land in downtown San Francisco outside of presidential visits and Michael Bay films, but money could make impossible routine. The paramedics had Maya loaded onto a gurney, wheels locked, ready to move the moment the aircraft touched down. David stood, his suit streaked with something. Sauce from the shattered plate, maybe, or just the accumulated evidence of kneeling on a restaurant floor while someone died. I'm coming with her, he said. Sir, there's limited space. I'm coming with her. Not negotiable, not optional, the statement of someone whose resources had just been reminded they existed for purposes beyond accumulation. The lead paramedic assessed him for a moment, then nodded. Stay out of our way and do exactly what we tell you. They moved toward the exit, the gurney rolling smoothly across tile that had been designed for aesthetics rather than emergency transport. Diners watched from their redirected positions, phones out, capturing footage that would flood social media within minutes. David didn't care. Let them record. Let them speculate. None of it mattered compared to the unconscious woman whose vitals continued their alarming decline. The helicopter sat in the middle of the intersection, rotors at idle, emergency lights turning the scene into a strobing tableau of crisis and wealth colliding. Police had cordoned off traffic, creating a landing zone that violated approximately 40 regulations and would be smoothed over through calls David's people were already making. They loaded Maya with efficient speed, the paramedics securing equipment while David climbed in behind them, folding himself into a jump seat that hadn't been designed for passengers, but would hold him anyway. 30-second ETA, the pilot announced through the headset David had been handed. The paramedic worked over Maya with focused intensity, adjusting IV flow, monitoring oxygen levels, calling out vitals that David's phone was recording for later analysis by experts he would hire regardless of cost. Come on, the paramedic muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Stay with us. We're almost there. Maya remained unconscious, her face pale beneath the oxygen mask, her body held immobile by straps and medical necessity. She looked smaller than David remembered from the brief glimpses he'd afforded her during months of invisible service. Younger, more fragile. Someone who had absorbed poison meant for him and might die for the courtesy. The helicopter lifted with the smooth power of expensive machinery, banking towards Stanford with the urgency of a machine that understood its cargo's timeline. Through the window, David watched Aurelius shrink below them, the restaurant where he'd dined in isolation, where someone had tried to kill him, where a woman whose name he still didn't know had chosen his life over her own. Maya Torres, the paramedic said, reading from the medical information that had been transmitted ahead. 28, nursing student, next of kin is. She paused, something in the information making her expression shift. Maria Torres, currently receiving treatment at UCSF Medical Center for stage 4 lung cancer. David absorbed this information like data points in an algorithm, except these points had weight beyond numbers. A woman working double shifts to pay for her mother's treatment. A nursing student who had recognized poison when no one else had. Someone who had built her life around helping others and had extended that philosophy to include a billionaire who had never acknowledged her existence. The guilt arrived not as dramatic revelation, but as cold certainty settling into his chest. He had been saved by someone he had rendered invisible through deliberate indifference. And she might die because she'd had the moral clarity he'd abandoned years ago in favor of efficiency and profit. 5 minutes to landing, the pilot announced. Pulse is stabilizing, the paramedic said, cautious hope in her voice. Still critical, but she's fighting. David leaned forward, his voice barely audible over the helicopter noise. Is she going to make it? The paramedic met his eyes. I don't know, but she's got a better chance at Stanford than anywhere else. You did the right thing. He wanted to argue that he'd done nothing right, that Maya had done everything while he'd sat distracted by emails and market fluctuations. But there would be time for that reckoning later. Right now, the only thing that mattered was keeping her alive long enough to understand why she'd made her choice. Stanford's rooftop landing pad appeared below them, medical team already positioned, equipment ready. The helicopter descended with precision, touching down with barely perceptible impact. Doors opened. The trauma team swarmed. Maya disappeared into their efficient protocols, Gurney rolling toward elevators that would deliver her to an intensive care unit designed for impossible cases. David followed, his security materializing from somewhere to flank him, his phone already receiving updates from the investigation he'd set in motion at Aurelius. But none of it felt adequate. None of it addressed the fundamental truth that someone he'd never bothered to see had seen him clearly enough to die for him, and he would spend however long it took making sure that sacrifice meant something. Stanford Medical Center's intensive care unit existed in that strange temporal zone where day and night lost meaning beneath fluorescent lights that never dimmed. Time measured not in hours but in vital sign updates, medication schedules, and the quiet efficiency of nurses who moved between rooms like sentinels guarding the border between life and whatever came after. David sat in a chair designed for temporary occupation, not vigil. Uncomfortable by intention, meant to encourage visitors to leave after appropriate intervals. He had been sitting there for 9 hours. His security had tried to convince him to return home, to let them monitor the situation, to trust that Stanford staff would notify him of any changes. He had ignored them with the same finality he used to dismiss bad investment proposals. Through the glass wall of Maya's room, he could see her still form beneath white sheets, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed with the steady rhythm of artificial vigilance. Tubes and wires connected her to equipment that did the work her compromised systems couldn't manage alone. The oxygen mask had been replaced by a nasal cannula, which the nurse had explained was progress. Her body remembering how to breathe without mechanical assistance. Dr. Reeves emerged from the room, pulling off latex gloves with practiced efficiency. She was in her 50s, with the confident bearing of someone who had spent 3 decades navigating medical crises that would have broken lesser physicians. David stood immediately. Toxicology results? He asked. Thallium sulfate, Dr. Reeves said. her voice carrying the careful neutrality doctors employed when delivering information that existed somewhere between bad and catastrophic. Mixed with a dermal penetration enhancer, sophisticated compound, whoever prepared this knew exactly what they were doing. David's jaw tightened. Prognosis? She received a significant dose through skin contact. In another 5 minutes. Dr. Reeves paused, letting the implication complete itself. We've administered Prussian blue, started chelation therapy, and her kidney function is responding. Slowly, but responding. The next 48 hours will tell us whether there's permanent neurological damage. Will she survive? Most likely, yes. But survival isn't the only metric that matters. Thallium poisoning can cause lasting effects. Peripheral neuropathy, cognitive impairment, vision problems. We won't know the full extent until she regains consciousness and we can do comprehensive testing. David absorbed this information the way he absorbed quarterly earnings reports. Data requiring analysis, variables demanding optimization. Except this time, the variables had names and consequences that extended beyond profit margins. When will she wake up? Could be hours, could be days. We've induced a medical coma to give her body time to process the chelation therapy without additional stress. When we bring her out of it, we'll know more. Dr. Reeves studied him with the assessing gaze of someone who had spent decades reading people alongside reading charts. Mr. Chen, you should know, her medical debt is substantial. Mother with stage 4 cancer, no insurance coverage for experimental treatments, student loans, and now this. Even with our best efforts, the financial burden is irrelevant, David interrupted. Whatever she needs, whatever her mother needs, whatever it costs, handle it. Send the bills to my office. He pulled out his phone, typed rapidly, then showed her the screen. This is my CFO's direct line. Call him, tell him what you need, and it will be handled within the hour. Dr. Reeves's expression shifted slightly. Not surprise. People with David's resources often made grand financial gestures, but something closer to approval. That's generous. It's inadequate, David said quietly. She saved my life. Money is the least complicated part of what I owe her. The doctor nodded once, then returned to her rounds, leaving David alone with the guilt that had been building since Maya collapsed. He returned to his uncomfortable chair and pulled out his phone, where reports from his security team had been accumulating with damning efficiency. Marcus Delgado, Aurelius's head chef, had been found 3 hours ago at a motel near the airport. Security footage showed him preparing to leave the country using a passport that identified him as Martin Chavez. He was currently being detained by federal agents who were very interested in discussing attempted murder and conspiracy charges. The poison had been sourced through contacts Marcus maintained from his previous employment at a restaurant in Los Angeles, an establishment that had closed suddenly after the owner's suspicious death. Background checks that Aurelius's management had apparently considered optional would have revealed this connection. They wouldn't make that mistake again, though the restaurant itself would likely never reopen after tonight's publicity. But Marcus was a tool, not an architect. Someone had hired him, paid him, provided the compound that had nearly killed Maya and would have killed David. The investigation David had mobilized was working backward through financial records, communication logs, and the intricate web of contacts that connected Marcus to whoever wanted a tech billionaire dead. The list of potential suspects was depressingly long. Business rivals, investors he'd outmaneuvered, former partners who felt cheated by acquisition deals that had enriched David while leaving them legally impoverished, people who believed his algorithms had destroyed their livelihoods or that his company's success had come at costs he'd never acknowledged. Any of them might have decided that poison was cheaper than competition. David's phone buzzed with an incoming call. His head of security, James Carmichael, whose calm voice carried the weight of someone delivering news that required careful reception. "We have a name," James said. "Martin Voss, former CTO of Neuralpath, The startup you acquired 2 years ago. David's memory supplied the details. Neuralpath had developed promising AI architecture that David's company had absorbed, along with patents, personnel, and market position. Voss had been offered a position in the merged entity but had declined, choosing instead to take his payout and disappear. He hired Marcus 6 months ago, James continued, paid in cryptocurrency through mixers designed to obscure the transaction trail. Our forensic accountants traced it through 4 different exchanges before connecting it to an account we believe belongs to Voss. We've also found email correspondence discussing your dining habits, security protocols, and preferred restaurants. Where is he now? That's the interesting part. He's dead. Heart attack 3 weeks ago. Confirmed by medical examiner. David frowned. So who carried out the plan after he died? Working theory is that Marcus decided to complete the job anyway, either to honor the contract or because he'd already been paid and feared whoever funded this would come after him if he backed out. We're still investigating whether there are other parties involved. The complexity should have been satisfying to someone whose career had been built on solving intricate problems. Instead, David felt only exhaustion, a dead man's vendetta, carried out by a chef desperate enough to commit murder in a crowded restaurant, resulting in an innocent woman fighting for her life because she'd had the moral clarity to intervene. I want everything you can find on Voss. Financials, communications, associates. And I want to know if Marcus acted alone or if someone else is still out there. Already on it. Also, the media has the story. You're going to need to make a statement. Later. Right now, I'm exactly where I need to be. David ended the call and looked back through the glass wall at Maya's still form. The machines continued their patient monitoring, translating her body's slow recovery into numbers that updated every few seconds. Progress measured in heartbeats and oxygen saturation, life sustained through chemistry and technology, while her own systems remembered how to function without assistance. A nurse entered the room, checked IV lines, made notations on a tablet, and adjusted something David couldn't identify. She worked with the quiet competence of someone for whom this was routine rather than crisis. When she emerged, she noticed David watching. "She's stable," the nurse said, offering the kind of gentle reassurance that suggested she'd seen too many vigils that ended badly. "Her vitals are improving. That's a very good sign. Can I see her?" "Family only in ICU. I'm—" David paused, recognizing the absurdity of what he'd been about to claim. He wasn't family. He wasn't even someone who had known her name 12 hours ago. He was just a man who owed her everything and had given her nothing in return. "I'm the reason she's here." The nurse's expression softened with understanding that went beyond protocol. 10 minutes. Don't tire her out, and don't touch anything connected to wires. David entered the room with the careful reverence of someone entering sacred space. The beeping grew louder, more immediate. Maya looked smaller in the hospital bed than she had collapsing in the restaurant, her face pale against white pillows, dark hair spread around her head in a way that suggested nurses had arranged it with the kind of dignity they afforded patients who might not wake up. He sat in the chair beside her bed, uncertain what he was supposed to do. Talk? Apologize? Sit in silence while machines kept her alive? "I don't know if you can hear me," he said quietly. "They say sometimes unconscious patients can. I don't know if that's true, or just something people say to make themselves feel better." He paused. "Your name is Maya Torres. I had to learn that from a paramedic. That should tell you everything about how badly I failed." The machines beeped in response. Not accusation, just measurement. "You saved my life. You saw something wrong, and you acted, and you paid a price that should have been mine. I don't know how to process that. I've spent 15 years building systems that optimize for efficiency, eliminate variables, predict outcomes. But I never predicted someone like you." He leaned back, exhaustion finally overwhelming the adrenaline that had sustained him through crisis. When you wake up, and you will wake up, because the alternative is unacceptable, I'm going to ask you why. Why you chose to intervene. Why you thought my life was worth yours. And then I'm going to spend however long it takes making sure that choice means something. Maya didn't respond. The machines continued their patient translation of biology into data, and David sat vigil beside someone who had seen him more clearly in 3 weeks than he had seen himself in 3 decades. Maya woke to the sound of machines translating her existence into data. The beeping arrived first, steady and insistent. Then the fluorescent light filtering through closed eyelids. Then the awareness of her body, heavy, unresponsive, connected to things that pulled and pressed and monitored with mechanical patience. She tried to move. Her hand twitched, the gesture small but sufficient to trigger a response. Footsteps approached. A voice, female and professional, spoke with the careful modulation of someone addressing the recently resurrected. Maya, can you hear me? If you can hear me, squeeze my hand. Maya's fingers closed around something warm. The pressure was weak, but present. Good. That's very good. You're at Stanford Medical Center. You've been unconscious for 36 hours. You were poisoned, but you're safe now. Do you understand? Maya managed a sound that approximated yes. Her throat felt raw, her mouth dry, her thoughts moving through fog that hadn't quite cleared. Memories assembled themselves slowly. The restaurant, the plate, the switch, the numbness spreading through her body like winter claiming territory. I'm going to remove your breathing tube. It might be uncomfortable. The discomfort was immediate and substantial, but brief. Maya coughed, gasped, and finally managed to open her eyes. The room came into focus gradually. White ceiling, medical equipment, a nurse whose kind face suggested she'd guided many people through this particular transition. Take your time. Your body has been through significant trauma. Maya's voice came out as a whisper. David Chen? The nurse's expression shifted slightly. He's fine. Thanks to you. He's been here most of the time since you arrived. Would you like to see him? Maya nodded, the movement requiring more energy than it should. The nurse made a brief call, then adjusted Maya's bed to a more upright position with practiced efficiency. Your mother has been notified. She wanted to come, but her treatment schedule... I know, Maya whispered. Of course her mother couldn't leave UCSF. Stage 4 lung cancer didn't pause for family emergencies. Is she okay? Worried about you, but stable. We've been keeping her updated. The door opened. David entered with the cautious bearing of someone approaching something fragile. He looked different than Maya remembered from months of serving him. Disheveled, exhausted, his expensive suit replaced by jeans and a shirt that suggested he'd dressed from whatever his security had procured rather than his own wardrobe. His eyes carried shadows that spoke of insufficient sleep and excessive guilt. He stopped a few feet from the bed, as if uncertain about the appropriate distance. You're awake. Apparently. Maya's voice was stronger now, though still rough. You're alive. Because of you. The words carried weight that went beyond gratitude. Because you saw something I didn't, and made a choice I don't understand. Maya managed a weak smile. I switched the plates. I know. I've spent 36 hours trying to understand why. You really don't know? David pulled the visitor's chair closer and sat, leaning forward with the focused intensity she'd seen him direct toward his phone during dinners. But this time, his attention was fully present. Tell me. Maya took a breath, organizing thoughts that still felt scattered. 3 weeks ago, I noticed the head chef meeting with men who didn't look like suppliers. I speak Spanish. They didn't know that. I heard them discussing you, your schedule, your habits, the word untraceable. I started paying attention. You could have reported it. To who? Restaurant management? They'd fire me for causing problems. Police? I had no evidence. Just overheard conversation in a language they might claim I misunderstood. And whoever wanted you dead clearly had resources. Reporting it would have put a target on me without necessarily protecting you. David absorbed this with the calculating focus of someone who had built his career on risk assessment. So you watched. I watched. I learned which stations your food came from, which dishes passed through too many hands, which sauces were prepared with unusual attention. And tonight, when your plate came out prepared by the head chef personally, something that never happened with that particular dish, I knew. You couldn't have known for certain. No, Maya admitted. But certainty isn't always available when decisions need to be made. I had enough information to recognize danger, and I had seconds to choose. So I chose. You chose to poison yourself instead of me. I chose to take the risk I was trained to survive. Her voice grew firmer despite her exhaustion. I'm a nursing student. I've studied toxicology, emergency response, the symptoms of various compounds. I knew that if I was right, I had a better chance of identifying what was happening to me and getting help than you would have had. You would have eaten, driven home, and collapsed alone. By the time anyone found you, it might have been too late. The logic was sound in a way that made David's guilt more complicated rather than less. She hadn't acted from pure altruism but from calculated risk assessment, recognizing that her medical knowledge gave her better survival odds than he would have had. You still nearly died, he said quietly. But I didn't. And neither did you. Maya met his eyes with the steady gaze of someone who had made her peace with her choice. That's the outcome that mattered. David was silent for a long moment, processing information that didn't fit into any algorithm he'd constructed for understanding human behavior. I never asked your name. In all the months you served me, I never once asked your name. I know. That should have mattered more to me than it did. You're not unique in that. Maya's tone carried no bitterness, just observation. Most people don't see service workers as people. We're functions. Food delivery systems, problem solvers, part of the atmosphere. It's not personal. It's structural. That doesn't make it acceptable. No, she agreed. But it makes it understandable. You exist in a world where efficiency is valued over connection. I exist in a world where connection is how we survive. Different systems, different priorities. David leaned back, something in his posture shifting. The poison was thallium sulfate, industrial grade, mixed with a dermal enhancer. The man who ordered it died 3 weeks ago. Heart attack. Unrelated to this. The chef tried to flee the country but was detained. The investigation is ongoing to determine if there are other parties involved. Maya processed this information with the clinical detachment of someone whose body was still recovering from the relevant chemistry. So it's over? The immediate threat, yes. But the broader question... He paused, choosing words with unusual care. The question of what happens now, that's more complicated. What do you mean? Your medical bills are covered. Completely. Your mother's treatments as well? Whatever she needs, experimental protocols, specialists, everything. Your student loans are paid. You'll never receive another bill from any creditor you currently owe. Maya's eyes widened. I can't accept. It's not negotiable. It's also not charity. It's debt repayment. You saved my life. Money is the most inadequate form of compensation I can offer, but it's what I have. That's not why I did it. I know. That's exactly why you deserve it. David pulled out his phone, navigated to something, then handed it to her. But there's something else. A job offer. Maya stared at the screen, which displayed a formal employment contract. Her exhausted brain struggled to process the details. Salary that was 3 times what she'd expected to earn after graduating. title that included words like risk assessment analyst and corporate security consultant. Benefits that seemed designed for executives rather than former servers. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You have pattern recognition skills that saved my life. You maintained composure under pressure that would have destroyed most people. You made a split-second decision based on incomplete information and got it right. Those are exactly the skills I need in my organization. I'm not qualified. You're overqualified for most of the people I currently employ. You just don't know it yet." David's voice carried conviction that went beyond politeness. "Finish your nursing degree. Graduate with a medical background that most security consultants lack. Then come work for me. Not as gratitude, but as employment. Use your skills to protect people who need protecting." Maya looked at the contract, then at David, then back at the contract. The salary alone would change her mother's life, would eliminate the crushing debt that had defined Maya's every decision for years, but something in her resisted the easy narrative of rescue. "This feels like guilt," she said carefully. "It is guilt," David admitted, "but it's also recognition. I've spent 15 years optimizing for efficiency while ignoring the human systems that make those optimizations possible. You reminded me that people aren't variables to be managed. They're individuals who make choices that can't be predicted by algorithms. So I'm a lesson? You're a person I failed to see until you saved my life, and I'm trying to ensure that failure means something." He paused. "You don't have to decide now. Focus on recovery. Finish school. Graduate. Then decide if working with someone who had to learn your name from a paramedic is something you can tolerate." Maya managed a laugh that turned into a cough. The nurse, who had been monitoring from the doorway, stepped in with water and a warning glance at David. "Time's up. She needs rest." David stood but hesitated at the door. "Maya?" "Yes?" "Thank you. For seeing what I didn't. For acting when I wouldn't have. For being the kind of person who makes choices like that." His voice carried something she'd never heard from him before, genuine humility. "I don't know if I would have done the same." Maya smiled weakly. "Then I guess we'll never know." He left, and Maya sank back into pillows that smelled of industrial detergent and hospital efficiency. The contract remained on the table beside her bed, alongside flowers that had arrived from people she'd never met, and cards from David's employees expressing gratitude to someone they'd also never met. She closed her eyes, exhausted by consciousness, and wondered if accepting his offer would be gratitude or something more complicated. A partnership built on debt and recognition, on the understanding that both of them had been changed by a plate switch that lasted 3 seconds and altered everything. The machines beeped their patient translations. Maya drifted toward sleep, and somewhere in the mathematics of recovery, she began to understand that being seen, truly seen, was its own kind of survival. Maya left Stanford Medical Center 3 weeks later on an afternoon when spring had finally convinced San Francisco's fog to retreat. The sun felt foreign against her skin, warm and insistent in ways she'd forgotten while recovering beneath fluorescent lights that knew no season. David waited by the entrance, leaning against a car that wasn't the usual black sedan his security preferred. This one was silver, modest by his standards, with a driver who had been instructed to give them privacy for the 40-minute drive back to the city. "You didn't have to come," Maya said, adjusting the bag of discharge paperwork and medication schedules that nurses had insisted she take, despite her protests that she understood her own treatment protocol. "I know." David opened the door for her, a gesture that felt simultaneously courteous and awkward from someone who usually had other people open doors. "But I wanted to." They drove in silence for the first 10 minutes, Maya watching the landscape transform from institutional medical campus to highway to urban sprawl. Her body still carried the weight of recovery, fatigue that arrived without warning, Occasional numbness in her fingers that doctors assured her would fade with time, moments where her vision tunneled slightly before correcting itself. But she was alive, and her mother, who had wept over video calls from her own hospital bed, was receiving treatments that might actually extend her life beyond the 6-month estimate they'd been given before David's intervention. "The conspiracy investigation closed yesterday," David said, breaking the silence. "Marcus is cooperating fully in exchange for a reduced sentence. No additional parties were involved. It was exactly what it appeared to be: a dead man's vendetta carried out by someone desperate enough to commit murder." "How long will he serve?" 15 to 20, probably. Attempted murder with aggravating circumstances, conspiracy, use of a controlled substance with intent to harm. His lawyers are arguing coercion, but the evidence suggests he knew exactly what he was doing. Maya absorbed this information with the detachment that had become her default when discussing the details of her own attempted murder. And Aurelius? Closed permanently, building sold, staff relocated or compensated. The liability alone would have destroyed them, even without the publicity. She wondered briefly about Chen, the other server who had watched her collapse, and the kitchen staff who had been unknowing participants in conspiracy. Their lives disrupted because someone had decided poison was an acceptable business strategy. "I've been thinking about your offer," Maya said. David's posture shifted slightly, attention focusing in that intense way she remembered from the hospital. "And? I want to accept. But with conditions." "I'm listening." Maya turned to face him directly, her voice carrying the clarity of someone who had spent 3 weeks in a hospital bed thinking about nothing but future architecture. "I finished nursing school first. No interruptions, no distractions, no pressure to start working before I have my degree. That's non-negotiable." "Agreed." "Second, I'm not joining your company as a token. Not as the woman who saved your life. Not as a diversity hire. Not as someone who gets special treatment because of what happened. I come in as a professional with skills you value, or I don't come in at all." David nodded slowly. "That's fair. Though you should know, the job offer isn't about guilt. It's about pattern recognition. You identified a threat that my entire security apparatus missed. That's worth more than sentiment." "Third," Maya paused, choosing her next words carefully, "my mother's treatment continues regardless of whether I take the job. That can't be leverage. It can't be something I lose if I quit, or if you decide I'm not working out." Something flickered across David's face. Not offense, but something closer to shame. "I would never." "You wouldn't intend to," Maya interrupted gently. "But power dynamics are tricky, and I've spent my entire adult life on the wrong side of them. I need to know that my mother's life isn't contingent on my employment." David was quiet for a long moment, processing the implication that he was capable of weaponizing generosity even without conscious intent. "You're right," he said finally. "Her treatment is guaranteed, legally documented, completely separate from any employment contract. My lawyers will draft something that makes that ironclad. Then yes, I'll take the job. After graduation." The car merged onto the Bay Bridge, sunlight catching the water below and turning it into fractured silver. David looked out the window, his profile carrying something that might have been relief or satisfaction, or the complex emotion of someone whose guilt had found productive outlet. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask." "Why accept? You could take the medical support, finish school, work anywhere. You don't owe me employment." Maya considered the question, searching for truth beneath the easier answers. "Because you're right that I have skills worth using, and because I spent 3 weeks watching people care for me, nurses, doctors, technicians who made $12 an hour and still treated me with dignity and competence. I want to build systems that protect people like them, people who do essential work while being treated as expendable. And you think I can help you do that?" I think you have resources I don't, and I think you've had your perspective adjusted in ways that might make you willing to use those resources differently. She met his eyes. You were a man who never asked his server's name. Now you're someone who pays for cancer treatment and offers jobs to people you used to render invisible. That's a significant recalibration. David's mouth curved slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. You're saying I've been improved by trauma. I'm saying you've been reminded that other people exist as fully realized humans rather than background elements in your story. Whether that's improvement or just baseline decency is something you'll have to figure out. The honesty should have been offensive. Instead, David found it refreshing in the way that cold water was refreshing after too long in stale heat. You're going to be extremely annoying to work with. That's the plan. They drove in more comfortable silence now, the contract between them taking shape through negotiation rather than rescue. Maya felt the weight of her future shifting, no longer defined by debt and double shifts, but by choices she could actually make. Medical school fully funded, mother's treatment secured, a job that would use her skills rather than just her labor. But beneath the practical relief lived something more complex. Gratitude mixed with wariness, hope tempered by the understanding that power dynamics didn't disappear just because someone wealthy decided to be generous. She would need to navigate carefully, maintain boundaries, ensure she didn't become dependent on the goodwill of someone whose attention could shift as easily as it had been captured. What about you? Maya asked. What happens to David Chen after this? He considered the question with the same careful analysis he'd applied to her terms. I've been thinking about that. I built a company on optimization, making systems more efficient, eliminating waste, maximizing return. But I never questioned what counts as waste. Turns out I was eliminating people along with inefficiencies. That's fairly common in your industry. Common isn't the same as acceptable. He turned to look at her. You saved my life by doing something no algorithm would have predicted. That suggests I've been optimizing for the wrong variables. So I'm recalibrating. Building systems that account for the fact that humans make choices that can't be reduced to data points. That's going to be expensive. Probably. But I've recently been reminded that some costs are worth bearing. The car pulled up to Maya's apartment building in the Mission District, a 3-story structure that had seen better decades and would likely never see them again. David looked at the building with the careful neutrality of someone trying not to reveal judgment. I can help you find somewhere. No, Maya said firmly. This is my home, my neighbors, my community, my mother's apartment 2 blocks away. I'm not interested in being relocated to somewhere more appropriate for someone associated with David Chen. He nodded, accepting the boundary. Fair enough. Maya gathered her belongings and opened the door, but paused before exiting. David? Yes? Thank you. For the medical support, for my mother's treatment, for the job offer. But more than that, thank you for seeing me. Actually seeing me. That matters more than the money. His expression shifted into something vulnerable, almost raw. I should have seen you months ago. That failure is something I'll have to live with. Then live with it productively, Maya said. Build something better. Not just for me, but for everyone you've been trained to render invisible. She closed the door and walked toward her building, aware of David watching until she disappeared inside. Her apartment smelled of the neighbors' cooking and the particular mustiness of old buildings in fog-prone cities. Home, with all its limitations and familiar comfort. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. Welcome home, Mija. Come see me when you're ready. I have questions about this billionaire who keeps calling my doctors. Maya smiled and typed back. Long story. I'll tell you everything. She sat on her second-hand couch, looking at the medication schedule that would govern her next several weeks, and the contract that would govern her next several years, And the life that had been fundamentally altered by 3 seconds of decision-making in a restaurant, she would never enter again. Outside, the city continued its complicated existence. Millions of people making choices and bearing costs, navigating power and survival, being seen and overlooked in patterns that repeated with exhausting regularity. But somewhere in the mathematics of that chaos, two people had found a different equation. Not rescue, not charity, not the simple narrative of wealth saving poverty. Just two humans who had been forced to see each other clearly and who had chosen to build something from that recognition. Maya closed her eyes, exhaustion claiming her despite the afternoon sunlight. When she woke, she would call her mother, review her class schedule for the semester she'd missed, and begin the careful work of rebuilding strength that poison had stolen. But for now, she rested. Alive because she'd seen danger and chosen intervention. Changed because someone had finally seen her in return. And in the delicate balance between debt and partnership, between gratitude and autonomy, between what was owed and what was chosen, a new contract was being written, one that acknowledged both of them as authors rather than just characters in someone else's story.